Hello and welcome to another episode of FTD Talk. I'm your host John James and I am a writer and campaigner for male victims of female perpetrated domestic violence. In this episode I'll be talking to Anne Silvers, who is the author of Abuse of Men by Women. I'll be talking to her about the book and about the subject as a whole. I hope you find this interesting. Welcome to FTD Talk, Anne.
Hi. Good to be here.
And can you start by telling me a little bit about yourself and what led you to write your book, Abuse of Men by Women?
Yeah. So actually, my first career was not counseling like it is now. It was microbiology. And eventually I had an opportunity to do my own therapy as a client and had such wonderful changes from that, made my life so much better that I decided that I wanted to switch up careers and went back to school, started over at nothing, and eventually became a counselor. And in doing that, one of the things I did was when I was doing a bachelor's degree in psychology, I did a minor in women's studies. And the minor in women's studies was a whole lot about men abusing women in all sorts of ways. And then when I was a counselor, and I had a friend actually who was a guy, and he started telling me stories about his wife and being mean to him, and I thought they were exaggerations, and eventually I realized they weren't, and that she was abusive, and it opened my eyes up. And then I started to recognize had been I'd only been a counselor a couple of years. I realized I had been missing it in my own clients. And I was blinded by the general idea that, it's all abuses in relationships is about men abusing women.
Yeah.
And then I started talking about it, and men just came out of the woodwork telling me their stories. And I realized this is a very common problem. And for men experiencing, and even women who are abusive, what is doubling down on all of it is this cultural, at best, silence, but even more often, it's not even the neutral silence. It's discounted, made fun of, even.
Yeah.
Or women are even empowered, like, you go, girl. And so I realized that I needed to write a book about it. And I got rather driven about that. It took me 3 years, and yeah, glad I did it.
And did you have any backlash writing the book?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Yeah. I'm not really accepted in the whole domestic violence field. And when I do talks to counselors, inevitably there's somebody really upset with me. Yeah, there's been a lot of squashing of information over the years from the very beginning of the whole domestic violence movement.
Yeah.
There's been active squashing of the numbers of men that are the subject of domestic abuse. And there's this false sense that if we give airtime to the fact that men are being abused by women, that we somehow are discounting that women are being abused by men. And it's, from my perspective, is not a competition. Abuse is bad, period, in all its forms.
Well, near the beginning of your book, you talk about the use of sexist control, both sexual activity and the withholding of sex.
Yeah.
If a man was to force or coerce a woman to have sex, then this would be rape. Do you think that the same applies to a female perpetrator? And if so, does the definition of rape itself, is that discriminatory?
Quite possibly it is. What I've noticed is it becomes a guy who has been sexually abused by a woman, I think, is more likely to be heard if he avoids using the rape word.
Yeah.
It may not be a good thing, but I have noticed that. Even with a couple I was working with, long time married, she was a very, she was a caring person, loved her husband, and eventually in the work, it came up that he used the word rape. He had been raped by a couple of women, and when I talked to him um, and suggested that, and I could see for her, the wife, she closed down when he used that word. And
Yeah.
when I used the sexual abuse word terminology, and I supported his experience, the wife opened up. You could just see her mind open up to it. And I was the first person in this man's entire life who acknowledged his story and um, and his experience,
Yeah.
and it really changed. It changed him. It changed his personality to just have that acknowledgement.
And was that all through semantics?
I think it was part of it. Part of
Yeah.
it was then the wife softened in terms of her being able to understand his experience, and so then she could be more supportive. And then part of it was I just, whether he used the word rape or not, I could handle that. Um, I just don't think many other people can digest it um, well. And so it just taught me, maybe if men, I get it. He felt raped, and it was a reasonable tag on the experience.
Yeah.
And yet it's so hard for people to get their heads around that I think, um, men, if they've experienced that, they might choose to just change up the terminology. It might be kind of painful because they might feel they are minimizing it in some way, but they actually might get more support.
Yeah, because the word rape is extremely powerful, much more than sexual abuse, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, it is. And I think, part of it is um, we have spoken the word so long now as it's what happens when men force themselves into a woman.
Yeah.
Um, that's the creates, I think, some mental roadblocks.
Mm.
Um,
And it,
and we can expand the term, but until people catch up to that expansion, you're going to get that roadblock.
yeah. In your book, you also talk about conditioning of the male victim. Uh,
Mhm.
those who have experienced such conditioning, like myself, understand. But for those who don't, can you tell me what is conditioning and how it works?
Yeah. So conditioning could be something that even started in earlier life, before this particular relationship that a man finds himself in where he's being abused. So the conditioning, like in your story, you were bullied as a child. So there becomes this conditioning that bullying happens. I somehow deserve it, maybe in the subconscious. Um, and you just, in a way, become accustomed to it. And then when it's happening to you in a relationship, there's a number of things that then go against you actually seeing the reality of your situation and stepping back and saying to yourself, this isn't okay. I'm getting myself out of this situation.
Yeah.
So when you're being bullied by a woman in a relationship, there might be some of that conditioning from earlier bullying experiences that makes it hard for you to recognize, I need to get out of this. This isn't normal. This isn't okay. I don't have to accept this. Um, and then there can be conditioning in the relationship And that kind of conditioning takes all kinds of forms, I think. Some of it is the that the abuse isn't necessarily consistent. Like you're not always being abused. It can be cyclical. So you're cycling into non-abusive phases that condition you to accept the relationship, condition you to think, no, this is a good place for me to be. Um, and and that conditioning phase can even include love bombing, which I don't know if that's a term you've come across, but I see it
I've
in your
come across it,
story.
but to explain it for my audience, please.
Yeah. So love bombing is actually a term I've only come across in the last few years, and partly it was because I was working with these men that no matter what I said, so one appointment they'd be talking about, a horrible, horrendous thing that had happened in their relationship. They were new experience of being abused by the woman, and they had broken up. They'd cut it off. And both these men were not, at the time I was working with them, living with the abusive partner. But the abusive partner would reach out to them and draw them back in. And every week was a new story. 1 week it would be, it's cut off, he's strong, we're talking about how to resist. The next week she would have contacted him again, they're back together again, he's so happy they're back together again. The next week they're broken up again. And it was just this cycling of being back together. And no matter how much I sort of helped him plan for the resistance to her pull back, seemed to cycle back into they were back together again.
Yeah.
And so I did some research, and that's where I found this term love bombing, and it so described what was going on for them. So with love bombing, the person brings to you this so much appreciation of you. You are just the greatest person on the planet from their eyes in those phases of the love bombing. And you're getting this love and affection that you just feel like you've never experienced in any other time in your life. If you lost it, you'd never get it again. And it often includes great sex, like wildly wonderful sex that, again, you've never had this before in your life. If you lost it, you'll never get it again. So that's the love bombing. But it's followed, and often in cycles, by this, you're so abhorrent, you're a terrible person, this just putting you down, demeaning, no sex, or abusive talk around how you're not worth having sex with, or you're a terrible lover. It's this cycle. And the love bombing can keep pulling you back in. And that was what was happening with both these men. Eventually, both the men got out of it. But it took many cycles through and a lot of support. And then, and one, I want to mention that one of the things you're up against when you're the target of love bombing is a psychological premise called confirmation bias. So confirmation bias is that we take in and absorb that which confirms what we already believe to be true, and we miss the rest. It's like our computer brain has a file system for putting in the messages that confirm what we already believe to be true, and no file for the things that counter it. So we just slough it off. So if early in a relationship we have this love bombing thing, we develop this bias, this belief that this woman is that personality. She just loves me like no one else could possibly love me. We have this great sex. We have this great connection. Of course, with the great sex, then you're having these huge orgasms and you're hormonally connected. And so that's the person you believe that they are. And then as you're moving through the relationship, you're having these experiences that are directly opposite to that. But your computer brain doesn't have any place to put it, and confirmation bias makes you slough it off. And then you end up feeling like, if I was just good enough, if I just did the right things, if I just had the right words, that personality I fell in love with would be back. And it's some shortcoming in me that personality isn't always there. But the reality is that was a fake persona. The reason it's the most love you've ever had and the greatest sex you've ever had is because it's not real. It's an act. And that's one of the things that keeps people stuck in abusive relationships.
Well, you've just described my relationship, my abusive relationship, and several other people that I've spoken to as well. So, wow.
Yeah. And I want to add to that that's not the only form it takes. So there's lots of guys out there that could be listening to this, and they don't identify with the love bombing thing, but that's that's not in every case. It's not always there, but it can be. There's also sort of a milder form of it, which I call dating girl, and that's a false persona that somebody puts on to woo you and capture you. And we all do. I think when we're dating, we put on what I call dating guy and dating girl. We put our best foot forward. But the abusive personality, it's more thought out. It's more a manipulation. It's not just sort of it's not just a mild putting our best foot forward. It's a fake personality.
Wow. You also talk in your book about physical abuse and how society sees physical attacks differently depending on the gender of the perpetrator.
Yeah.
Can you tell me, in your opinion, how we can change societal perspectives to see all violence as bad?
It's we have to be telling these stories, and even when we're met with resistance, we have to keep telling them, and somehow try to put it in a form that people can have go in, because we're up against their confirmation bias. We're up against the vast of society having the belief that when guys are hit by a woman, there's a whole belief system around that. A, that they deserved it. B, it's the woman must only be lashing out in self-defense.
Yeah.
C, it doesn't really hurt because guys are big and women are small. And it doesn't really matter. And so we have to get it through to people. It does matter. It's one of the reasons the subtitle of my book is "It Happens, It Hurts." It hurts when it hurts psychologically when men get psychologically abused. All the different kinds of abuses, including physical abuse. It hurts, and we have to stop this training of females that they get to slap men.
Yeah.
We are training young girls that it's okay to slap a guy when you're just ticked off at him, for minor infractions. And we would not in a million years say that a guy could slap a woman for that same thing.
Oh.
And although there was a time in history, not that long ago, like I would take us back to the 1940s, let's say 1950s, where there was still this thing about a guy can slap around his woman. But we're a long way away from that. The 1950s is 70 years ago.
Yeah.
And we're no longer saying to men, we're saying that they can slap around their woman. We're training our men, as we should be, that they can't hit their female, that their partners.
Yeah.
But we're not doing the same thing for girls. We're doing the opposite. It's in our media. It's even in the children's movies. The movie Frozen, which was super popular just a few years ago. And I know that little kids are sitting and they're watching that movie over and over and over again. And at the end of the movie, one of the main character girls hits the guy hard enough that he falls off a dock. And that is, now the guy was not a good guy, but he wasn't doing anything awful in the moment that she was defending herself against.
Yeah.
And so what is a young, boys and girls, what message are they receiving? The boys are receiving, it's okay for a girl to hit me. And the girls are receiving, it's okay for me to hit a guy. And in fact, it's applauded. It's the culmination of this movie. And that's just one example of.
Yeah, like you say, that's just one example. There are many examples where, it's supposed to be funny.
Yeah.
For a woman to hit a guy.
Yeah.
And I mean, in your experiences, carrying on the physical abuse, in your experience, have you seen a difference between the methods of a guy hitting a woman or a woman hitting a guy?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I've had couples where they come in and they're telling me the story of her hitting him. And I've got to look at the woman and saying, that's not okay, right? And I get, sometimes they know it's not okay. Other times I get this look on her face of, no, it's okay. And then I'll get some women who are defending it. It's not just even a look on their face of like, what the heck are you telling me? It's not okay. Why can't I do that? That look.
Yeah.
I get them defending it. I've had a woman who told me that a therapist said to her, I don't know why you didn't hit him. And it just, so yeah, it's not at all, there's very few times where I've gotten the response of, yeah, I know it's not okay.
Some of the guys that I've spoken to on this show, actually, they've been attacked in their sleep.
Oh yeah.
Do you think that's because they're more vulnerable there?
Yes, absolutely. So this is a great, I'm glad you brought this up, because this is one of the things that counters what a lot of people have in their mind. So a lot of people have in their mind, a woman can't really hurt a guy because typically she's smaller. Okay.
Yeah.
And so we need to educate people that there's a lot of ways that abusive women do hurt guys. And a lot of it is ways that they overcome their strength disadvantage. Now, and there isn't always a strength disadvantage in every couple, right? But it's probably more common that the woman is not as strong as the man.
Yeah.
So surprise attacks is one of the ways that a woman can overcome that disadvantage. So attacking you when you're asleep, attacking you when you're drunk, attacking you when you're driving. And another way they overcome it is by using objects. So, she doesn't have to be physically stronger than him in order to hurt him with a knife or a gun or a projectile, throwing things at him. She can often, another way that a woman overcomes the strength disadvantage is her knowing he won't hit her because he's a good guy and he won't hit her. Yeah. And so she takes advantage of that by pounding on him, and he doesn't feel like he can hit back. And I'm not encouraging him to hit back. There was at one time a abuse helpline for men who were being abused by women, and I had many conversations with the woman who was running that. It disbanded. It was an American organization. It disbanded because of lack of funding, but she kept it going honorably for 10, 15 years. And the advice that they gave men was try to get yourself into a ball formation. So try to, if you can get up against a wall so your back is protected, and you curl up, and ideally you have your hands over your head, so as much as you can protect your head. You know, sometimes women will provoke men so that the man will hit back, and then she'll call the police, and it'll all be his fault, and he'll go to jail. So there's a lot of reasons to not hit back, unfortunately. And then another way that sometimes women will overcome their strength disadvantage is actually engaging other people to attack him. And I had one guy, his wife engaged her teenage sons from a previous relationship. She engaged them in physically abusing him.
Wow.
And he was a big guy, and he didn't want to hit back. And yeah, he's one of the stories in my book. I don't remember if that was what this, part of his story that I included, because I very purposely broke people's stories up, so as to not expose them. And this is one of the problems in getting the word out and having people really recognize what's going on, is because in telling your story, you're made vulnerable to all kinds of abuses from an ex.
Yeah, I have a few men come forward and speak to me on the show, but I'm sure there's a lot of men out there who don't want to speak out and feel as if they can't speak out.
Yeah. We're up against that. We're up against that it's legitimate, that they are putting themselves in an exposed position if they were severely abused, because that abuser is still abusive, most likely. And so we'll look at ways, financial ways, professional ways, psychological ways to destroy him if he speaks up. And the other thing we're really up against with the whole issue is parts of man law, which are don't talk. Men aren't supposed to be in pain of any kind, including emotional pain. Men feeling like it's a sign of weakness, and men aren't supposed to be weak. So that we're up against that as well, in making this in this being such an not talked about subject.
And one of the most powerful methods of abuse, in my opinion anyway, is the psychological and emotional abuse. I think it's worse than physical abuse, to be honest.
Yeah.
But can you explain to my audience how the female abuser can use emotional and psychological abuse?
Yeah, that's a really broad topic, because every other kind of abuse, which is there's seven forms of partner abuse. There's financial, sexual, legal, physical, verbal, and spiritual, and there's psychological, and synonyms for it would be emotional or mental. So all the other forms of abuse have a psychological aspect to them.
Yeah.
And you're right when you say it's a deep pain. It's these invisible scars that can be, last much longer than a physical bruise. It's this psychological bruising. And there's ways of undermining your self-esteem, undermining your sense of self, isolating you so that you don't have a support system. And a lot of and gaslighting is something that comes to mind. So there's gaslighting is this crazy making form of psychological abuse where it undermines your belief that you see reality. And they try to replace your understanding of reality with their version that they want you to have. And other forms of psychological abuse too are things like a huge one these days is the alienation of affection. So alienating your own children from you, and that is, oh, the depth of that wound is so deep, and the struggle to get time with your children becomes potentially so consuming. It's very debilitating. Other ways of psychological abuse could be, harassment or stalking, manipulation, playing helpless. So making one of the things that's some of the ways that women abuse men are the same as men abuse women, and then some of the ways are available to women because of typical gender roles. And I think one of the ways that is available to women is this playing helpless. So triggering in guys the rescuer, and her being this damsel in distress, and the guy rescuing her, and it can become quite heady for a guy to feel like I'm rescuing somebody. You get to put your Superman cape on and feel like you're being useful, and sometimes the woman has manipulated that, and it can become, you can end up pulled into an abusive relationship by a false helplessness being presented, or even, I guess, a real helplessness, but you should not be helping that particular person because they are going to end up using you. And here's a tough thing about the whole abuse topic is what's abusive and what's okay behavior, and what's helplessness that is a manipulation, and what's genuine helplessness. Like what does it look like when a woman is genuinely could use your help and would benefit from it and would be grateful and would be strengthened by your help, versus
Yeah.
a woman who's doing the helpless thing and wants to be helpless because it works for her. And those sorts of things become very confusing and mind-boggling for the person who's the target of abuse. And when you get so confused, your mind just kind of shuts down and you're stuck.
And I guess when you do get confused like that, then that makes you vulnerable to abuse.
Yeah. We have, and if you get so often, also an outcome is, so confusion can be an outcome, anxiety can be an outcome. And when we're in a sort of a fairly constant anxious state, or an anxious state that comes and goes as abuse cycles can happen, that anxious state, our mind is not really good at problem solving in that state. We tend to be closed, and actually any kind of severe emotional pain can kind of close in our brain, and we can't think that clearly, and we have to get away long enough to clear our head, or be working with a therapist or somebody, a support system that's giving us opportunities to clear our head, so that we can look more with a problem solving mind to take in the information about what's really going on and genuinely think through options. When we're in that stuck, confused state, we can't see options.
Yeah.
They might be there, but we can't see them.
What are some of the reasons why a woman would abuse, and are they any different from why a man would abuse?
Most of them would be similar, and a problem with the whole domestic violence field in general, not always, but in general, is it has decided that partner abuse happens because of patriarchy. That partner abuse is something available to men because of patriarchy.
Yeah.
And in my book, Abuse of Men by Women, I list 72 reasons why a woman might abuse a man. And most of them are the same reasons why a man might abuse a woman. So it's just so many more possibilities than who has more power in the culture. And so it could be mental illness, it could be personality disorders, and those two things are different. So mental illness is things like anxiety, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, depression. Those sorts of things are mental illnesses. So mental illness, they can often be helped, with medication or with therapy, or a combination of both. They can often be helped. Personality disorders are different. Personality, think about personality, how intrinsic it is to your sort of interior self. And it's not entirely constant, but fairly constant. So personality disorders are things like narcissism, sociopathy, histrionic personality disorder. People are very dramatic. Those are some personality disorders, and those can lead to personalities that are abusive, and not a lot of chance that they're going to change because it works for them on some level.
Yeah.
I have seen often women who are abusing their partner, and anxiety is driving it. And those I've had some of the best results with being able to help the woman see that her behaviors are abusive, help them see that it's driven by the anxiety, heal the anxiety, and we change it all. And I've had many couples who've ended up very happy and healed through that process. Personality disorders, not so much. That's a tough go. Those people are not generally motivated to change. They don't generally see what they're doing as a problem. They might give lip service to, oh yeah, it's a problem, but return to even the lip service is more of a manipulation, placating. And then there's things like, other drivers for abuse could be, somebody might be raised in an abusive household. So then they had that modeled for them and they think that's the way to behave. It could be the opposite. Somebody could have been raised as a princess. So they're pedestalized and they get their way all the time. And so they expect that from their partner and become very angry when they don't get it. I've got 72 reasons in my book, so I'm touching on some of them, but there's lots more. And I wanted to also say another thing that comes to mind is with men, the one that when men are abusing women, it's often blamed on patriarchy. When women are abusing men, it's often blamed on self-defense. And self-defense is one reason why a woman might be abusive to a man, or actually do abusive behaviors. It wouldn't be called abuse if it was genuine self-defense, because it's self-defense. It's not abusive. That same behavior can be abusive in other circumstances when it's not self-defense. So self-defense is one of the reasons that that a woman might engage in potentially abusive behaviors that are potentially abusive. But it's one reason out of 72. There's 71 other ones. And so we have to open our eyes to that. Not every time a woman hits a man or is nasty to a man, or um, you know, let's take away. I want to take away nasty, because that again sounds abusive. So not every time a woman hits a man or yells at a man is she being abusive, because it might be self-defense.
Yeah.
But lots of times it is abusive. So one of the things is, when I'm talking about abuse, I often talk about a continuum. So any behavior that has the potential of being abusive, we can put on a continuum from not at all abusive to entirely abusive. And there's a whole range in between there. So if we take something like, one of the abuses that I see a lot with women against men is um, manipulated pregnancy, an accidental pregnancy that's really on purpose, okay, to trap a man. And so if we have a continuum for accidental pregnancy, over on the one end is it really genuinely was accidental. And over on the other end is she really went out of her way to get pregnant against his wishes, so that she could trap him. And then on the continuum, we have things in between. Another example would be, and maybe even a better one would be, like hitting. Okay, so on one end we've got, it's not at all abusive, and on the other end it's entirely abusive. And so on the low end we would have self-defense. She hits him in self-defense. And on the other end is she's pummeling him, and actually what you describe in your book, early on in your book, about an experience, and where you're being pummeled and you end up injured, and she's not remorseful, and all of that. So the worst of the hitting. And in between we would have some things where there's various points on this continuum. So let's say some of the women I've worked with, where they've come in as a couple and she hit him. It was not self-defense. It was not something she should have done. And, he didn't come away necessarily with bruises, but if we stay on that same track, somewhere down the line, he certainly could, because if she's empowered to keep doing that sort of thing and has no remorse or re-examination of it, it potentially will end up climbing on the next time it'll be higher on this continuum. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I want to take you back to what you said about self-defense.
Yeah.
Because if a woman hits a man, in some instances, yes, it would be self-defense. However, if a man hits a woman in self-defense, that's a completely different matter.
You're right. You're right. Culturally, it's not going to be seen as okay, even if it was his last resort, even if he'd have to die otherwise. Unfortunately, there just isn't the cultural space. Now, I will give it that there's a chance that his blow could hurt more than hers, but if she's but multiple, it depends on how she's landing her blow, and it depends on how many blows she's giving, et cetera, et cetera. But a man has to be very careful, because a woman can potentially hit him just so he'll hit her back, and she can call the police and get him jailed and make his life miserable, even if it's in self-defense. Chances
I've
are.
had guys. I don't know what it's like in the States, but I've had guys talk to me from the UK who they've called the police and reported that they are the victim of abuse, and they've been arrested.
Yes. I had a guy call me yesterday who just he was clearly the victim, and he called the police to protect himself and his children. And when the police arrived, she convinced them that he had hit her, and he was jailed. And um, I mean, this cascading of horrible that happened in his life. So it's just a far too common story.
So it's no different in the States then. The police are biased towards women being the victim and men being perpetrators.
Yeah, so I will say that I've heard some encouraging stories in that there are some police departments and some police who are more educated, and they are being more actually looking at what's the evidence here, one way or another. The Johnny Depp story comes to mind, the Johnny Depp Amber Heard story, where there's a lot of evidence that Amber Heard, his wife, Johnny Depp's wife at the time, physically abused him multiple times. And there's a lot of evidence backing it up. But and there's not evidence backing up him having her accusations that he hit her.
Yeah.
But there's many people that believe her story and ignore the evidence on the other side.
Yeah, I think that's a problem that's going to last for a while unless we can change it. And that's what I wanted to ask you next, actually, that, we have these obstacles in front of us, societal views, lack of understanding, even lack of safe places for men.
Yeah.
How can we overcome these obstacles?
I mean, I'm taking a big sigh because it's not going to be easy. It's not easy. I do think so. Let me say some encouraging things. I do see an expansion of awareness compared to when I started talking about this, which I think my book, I think I was 2014 maybe when I published my book. I'm trying to look quickly at the front of it and see if I can find it. 2014 was when I first published the book. And I feel like there has been movement forward. Society, unfortunately, we should be better than this, but we tend to have pendulum swings. Okay. And it is a legitimate thing that there was a time when women were automatically disbelieved. There was a time when it was okay for men to hit their wives, control their wives, etc. But we as a society said that's not okay, and we made that not okay. And you would be hard pressed to find a group in the U.S. or the Western world that thinks that is promoting you can hit your woman. So we have advanced beyond that. But what happened is the pendulum swung in the opposite direction, where now it's like women, it's the you go girl thing.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's the way society has treated many things. When they overcome something that's bad, they swing it to the other side, where now another group is being harmed. And that's where we are. So we've got to try and force that pendulum into the middle and get it to where there's more people of talking about all forms of partner abuse are bad. Any kind of relationship, there can be partner abuse in it. It's bad. Want to work against any belief system that it's okay. And we want to help people develop the skills that are for healthy relationships.
And that, I guess, I guess that'd include training the police as well to change their view.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
One question I'm always asked as an abuse survivor is, why didn't I leave?
Yeah.
What reasons would there be for not leaving a female abuser?
Yeah. So it's a long list. It's not 72 things like my list of why people abuse, but it's a long list. So I mentioned confirmation bias. So this idea that you've fallen in love with the person who wooed you, and and your brain has a hard time seeing that this person is abusive when they then turn abusive. So this hope that if I just do the right thing, I'll get that personality I fell in love with back. And it's some shortcoming on my part that she's this new personality. So that can get in the way. Um, the psychological abuses really cloud our brain. You know, there's a lot of confusion. There's undermining of our self-esteem. There's shame. You know, especially for men. I really want to talk about this again. This whole thing around men are supposed to be strong. You know, can't be weak. So to admit you are abused by a woman would be, for some men, admitting to a weakness that they can't allow themselves to admit to, even to themselves. Um, Another thing that really gets in the way for men is the cultural blindness. So they've got a whole culture saying, "Nah, this can't be happening to you. You're no, it's not happening," and so they can't see it. Um, and they don't expect to be treated this way by a woman, and so it's it's a little bit like, I don't know if you've heard the analogy with the frog being put into the the water. So if you put a frog into hot water, it'll jump out and save itself. Put a frog into tepid water and turn up the heat, it'll stay in and die. And I think that happens a lot in abusive relationships. You're staying in, and then you're dying slowly. You know, your psyche's dying, your self-esteem is dying, and you're drained. It makes it hard for you to find your way out. Also, particularly for men, there's a lack of support, when you do tell your stories. And so you again think, this can't be happening to me. I've got to be wrong. There's a lack of support in terms of resources for physically abused men in particular, to be able to get out. There aren't shelters. There aren't. And then another factor is, one way that abusive people can abuse is isolating the targets of their abuse. So they'll do things potentially like I had a guy whose wife told him that his best friend hit on her. Well, it wasn't actually true, but when he went to the best friend and the best friend denied it, he didn't believe the best friend. He believed his wife, and so he became estranged from his best friend.
Yeah.
There was another time, same person. One day he was working, and his mom and dad were at the house, and he knew that she had served him lunch. When he got home, she took him aside and told him this whole story about how mean his mom and dad were to her because they had said this particular mean thing about the sandwich that she had made. And so he went to his parents defending his wife, and they're like, that didn't happen. He didn't believe them. So he story after story like that undermined his relationship with his mom and dad. And that sort of isolation, manipulation, slow and methodical, happens. So you've got nowhere to go then to even tell your stories. If as a man you were bold enough to tell your stories,
Yeah.
because man law says don't tell, and don't be in emotional pain. And so I feel like there's just men are up against a lot to see what's happening and to strategize how to get out of it, um, and to get any help. There's so many levels going against them to see
Well,
what's going on.
thank you for explaining confirmation bias, because years after my abuse, I now understand why I didn't leave.
Yeah. So to just reiterate that, so you
Yeah.
fall in love with the person who woos you,
Mm.
and if they woo you with the objective to trap you, then they potentially woo you with this false persona, and then when they show themselves, because really they wanted to trap you to abuse you, or trap you to, for financial gain, or trap you for, because they wanted a partner, but they don't really care about you at all, then, you have a hard confirmation bias, makes it hard for you to see the reality of who they are. And you just keep working, you're trying to work your way back to that person you fell in love with.
Well, I can't believe that we've been talking for an hour. It's been absolutely
Oh,
fascinating. Fascinating. But in conclusion, what
yeah.
is next for Anne Silvers?
Oh, wow. Well, one of the things I do is I write about, I'm a counselor, and still see clients, and write a lot of different self-help books about a lot of different topics. And it's not the greatest marketing technique to have this wide range of topics, but I just see so many areas that I can help people in. So I continue to work on writing self-help things about not only, what do abusive relationships look like, but what do healthy relationships look like, and how do you get them? So I
Yeah.
have books on communication, and one of my and anxiety is another one of my specialties. So my most recent book is a workbook on anxiety, and I'm very proud of. Um, and I love workbooks for what they can do in terms of taking people through a step-by-step process that very much parallels therapy. And so I have, my brain is full of projects, and yeah, so I keep trying to, where I can, keep trying to raise awareness about partner abuse, and in particular, men who are being abused by women, and even, even trying to help women who, catch themselves at this, and recognize that they need to change, and help them change.
Well, it was a fascinating book, and I've had a fascinating conversation. So thank you for both.
Well, thank you for thanking me. And because some days I really need it. Some days I feel like, what am I doing? uh, and so I appreciate it, and I've enjoyed the conversation as well.
Good. Thank you, Anne, and take care.
Okay, thanks. You too.
Thank
Have a
you.
great day. Yeah.
You too.
Bye for
Bye
now.
bye.